Hello and welcome to SFDC Panther Lightning Component Development Session Day 3. I'm Amit Singh, and here in this tutorial we will learn what are the attributes in Lightning Component and how we use attributes in the Lightning Components, how they will help us to develop the Lightning Components, what are the different type of data types in the Lightning Components that we can use, how we can use the collection in the Lightning Component like list, set, map, array, what are the value provided in the Lightning Component, how we can call the JavaScript controller method from the component to execute the functionality that we put inside the JavaScript controller method, and how we'll call the JavaScript action on a button click, and we'll also build a sample utility for calculator for providing some JavaScript events. So let's go ahead and start that. Attributes in Lightning Components. Attributes are similar as a Apex variable that we use in our Apex controller classes, and that are same as that variable properties we use in Apex class. For taking the input and displaying the output, we use attributes in the Lightning Component. For an example, you can see to create an attribute in the Lightning Component, it always starts with the aura colon attribute. Then we need to give the name of the attribute, whatever you wanted to give. We cannot give any space in the name inside the name of the attribute, as we cannot give the same in Apex. And we can also give the type, whatever the type of attribute is: string, integer, Apex class, as object, map, set, list, object. We can also provide the accessibility of the component, accessibility of the attribute, that is public, private, and global. You can also set the default value for any attribute required, and description. Data types in Lightning Components. So there are different type of data types in Lightning Components. I have listed few of them. String for getting the string as a input or output, integer for getting the number, currencies, decimal, and then boolean for storing the boolean values, list, set, map, array as object, and custom Apex classes, and then objects. So let's go ahead and see how we can use some of the data types in our Lightning Component. So this is the org that we used. Let's go ahead and open the developer console, and in the meantime we can also open our docs and Lightning. So this is the application, this is the component that we developed on the previous day tutorial. Now let's go ahead and create a new component, and we will name it as attribute example. First we will see we will create attribute. We will give it as a name, or we can just say whom. We can provide the type as string, and then we can put the default value as SFDC Panther. So let's go ahead and see how this is similar to the Apex class. If you wanted to declare the same variable in the Apex, how we will declare? For example, let's provide the access as well. Now if you wanted to declare the same variable in Apex, we will use public string home equal to SFDC Panther. So this is the way that we will declare the variable property in Apex class. So now you can see this public access modifier is related with the access with whom this variable will be accessible, either outside the component or inside the component. What is the default value? We are already providing the default value after equal statement. What is the type? The type is string. And what is the name of the attribute? So this is the similar way, but the syntax is completely different. This is a simple attribute that we can declare using string type. If you wanted to declare variable using let's say age, you can provide integer, you can provide as 24 access. If you don't want it to give the access outside the component, you can change it to the private, and let's save it. So this is the basic example for defining. If you wanted to define the S object, let's go ahead and say that contact obj. For the type, you need to provide contact. If you don't want to provide anything for the default, just remove this default. So this object will contain all the context fields in this variable name. As we access this, if you wanted to create this in Apex, as Apex, you can just have a basic look in here in that. If we declare in Apex, we'll get all the fields related to contact object. In a similar way, we will also get all the field of the contact object here in this variable, in this attribute. Collection in the Lightning components. So there are 4 types of collection in the Lightning component that are available. First is array. We can store any type of array in the, for example, string, contact, account, custom Apex classes, as objects, and then there is list. We can also store the list. When we say list, we can store any kind of data. We don't need to provide the data type as array. As you can see, in the first array we need to provide the string, but in the list we don't need to provide the data type, what kind of value we wanted to store in this attribute. We can just give the generic name as a list, and we can store anything over here, either the color name, either the as object, or we just wanted to display or store the wrapper class data. We can also store that. For the set, the same thing is set. As we know in the Apex, that set doesn't contain the duplicate value. Set here also set doesn't contain the duplicate value. It will also look like an array. And for the map, in Lightning component there is a complete different way how we can use map. We can define the map here in the Lightning component using the map type of attribute, map type of data type. But if you wanted to iterate, if you wanted to use this map in Lightning component using for each loop or iteration, we need to build the map from the backend using the JavaScript file. Otherwise, we'll not be able to use the map here in Lightning component, and will also not be rendered the output of the Lightning component. We'll get error, that is fail to initialize the component. So let's see how we can use these 3 set of collection, and we'll see the map in the later on tutorials. So for the array, here we can just provide like colors, and for the default, as you can see in the PPT as an example, red, blue, yellow. And for the same thing, we can also put list, like color list, color set, and change the type here from the array of string to the list, from the array of string to the set. Now if you'll save it, we will be able to save without any error. Value provided in Lightning components. So in Apex class, if you wanted to use the value of any variable or property that we declared, we just use the name of that variable in the Apex inside the Apex class. Or if you wanted to use that property inside the VA page, then we just use a simple syntax, and that is curly braces, exclamation mark, and the name of the variable. But in case of Lightning component, if you wanted to use attribute, if you wanted to display the value of the attributes, there is a name, there is a value provider that is called as V. And if you wanted to display, or if you wanted to use that particular variable in our lightning input, in our UI input for input, we need to use the syntax like curly braces, exclamation mark, v dot, the variable name. In the example, the variable name is color name, so we used v dot color name. So let's go ahead and see how we can use this value provider in the lightning component to show the output of the attributes that we declared. Like if I wanted to see the show the welcome message, I'll just type welcome v dot home, and if I wanted to show the age, we can also say age v dot age. And in case of color, if you wanted to show the color, as this is a list, we can say color v dot list. If we use this, we will not be able to see any output, because as in VFPS we cannot display the list, as same as in the lightning component we cannot display the list. So for to get the output, we need to use the indexing 0 1 2. Now as we wanted to see the output, let's go ahead in the application and put our component, comment out the previous component that we uses. Click on preview. Here you can see that welcome SFDC Panther is 24 and color red. And using the same way, if you wanted to see the output for the other variables, for the other attributes, for the color list and color set, we can just use the same thing that we do for we did for the array. If you'll go ahead and refresh the application, you will get the output red. So this is the basic, this is the simple example that how we can use attributes, how we can use value providers to display the output in the application, and we'll also see how we can use these variables, these attributes in the input. As you can see that we used in the percentage calculator, we created two attributes, and inside the value we use those variables, and then here we use those variables to calculate the percentage using the aura math functions. Basic method of components class. So before we go ahead and implement the sample utility, I would like to introduce some basic method of component class, because once we will be start development, we will be using some keywords, we will be using some methods, and in your mind you might have some questions like, from where I'm getting these methods, or from here I can get more methods that I can use for the practice purpose. So there is a component class in the Aura docs. If you navigate to the Aura docs, inside the JavaScript API, you can click on the component and you will see all the methods that are available here in the component. So I have listed few of them. That is get for getting the variable, getting the value of a variable in a lightning component. Set takes two parameter, one is key and the other one is value, for setting like a map. If you wanted to put any value in a map, we need to provide key and value. This at the same way we need to provide the key and value for the set function. Find is used for finding the component using the aura ID, whatever the aura ID we have provided. Get name for getting the name of the lightning component, or whatever the particular component that is responsible for accessing the particular JavaScript code. And is valid, it shows that either the component is valid or the component has been destroyed. So let's go ahead and see from what are the other methods that you can go ahead and in the Aura does. So once you will open the Aura document, you need to click on JavaScript API, and after that you can click on component, and it will take to your new page, and here you will get all methods with the example. So let's go ahead and see what are all these methods over here in the component. So we will create a new button over here, lightning input, lightning con button. So before that, I will give you a sample brief about how we can call the JavaScript, how we can call the controller method from the action of a button click or browser events like on click, on hover, on change, on key up, key down, on double click, on click. So to call the JavaScript method from the component, we need to use a variable, or we need to use a keyword that is called as C, and that is also known as action provider for the lightning component. And if you wanted to call the method from the component to a JavaScript, what we need to do, we just need to provide inside the action, for example here in the button on click, we wanted to call this do click method of the JavaScript. So you just need to put the curly braces, exclamation mark, C dot, and the name of the function. If you have provided name here as do click in the controller, you need to provide the name, the same name that you are providing over here in the event. And we'll also see how we can get the attributes. So before this exercise, I'd like to come back on the previous slide and we'll see all these methods. So on the first, we will see these two methods, component.isValid and getName, on the click of the button, and then we'll see set, get, and find. So here you can see that on the click of the button we are calling do click. Let's go ahead in the component controller and put the alert. One is for component.isValid and the other one is for component.getName. So as JavaScript is case sensitive, so you have to provide the same name as here that is provided here in the Aura doc. For example, if you are getting the name, you have to provide the same name. Now let's go ahead and preview the application. Oops, I forgot to provide the label of the button. Here you can see if I click on this button, there must be two alert saying that component is valid, so it is returning as true. If I click on OK, it is returning me the name of the component followed by the attribute, whatever the namespace for that. The namespace is C. You can see that here in the URL that namespace is C. This is why it is returning as C, and then it is saying at attribute example. So now let's go ahead and see how we can use the other three methods, that is get. We are going to use get. Get method is basically used for getting the value of any attribute in the JavaScript. For example, here if you wanted to get the value for whom attribute inside the JavaScript, we just need to use component.get. As we are using the value provider concept here in the lightning component, we need to provide v dot attribute name. If we provide only whom, we are not providing this part, then we will not be able to get the value for that particular attribute. The error is because of the semicolon. Now if you will refresh the application, click on the method, there should be 3 alert, and on the third alert you can see that the default value for the attribute whom we are getting here on the alert for getting. And then next is set. Set method is basically used for setting the value for any attribute or any object that we have defined in the Lightning component. For example, here in this example, if you wanted to set the value for vHome component, home attribute, we can just use component.set, and component set takes 2 parameters. Key, the key is say we can attribute, or if you wanted to, if you are interacting with the components using the events or any other utilities, then we can also provide our own attribute that we will see. In case we are only here, we are only using attribute and then value, the value that we wanted to be set in that particular attribute. So let's say for this attribute I wanted to set as test value, component.set, now if you will refresh, before refreshing the page or before clicking on the button, I would like to show you one thing that you must need to see. Here you can see that it is saying that welcome SFDC Panther. Now if I click on this button, it should change that welcome test value. You can see it is changing to welcome test value. So for setting the data, the real example, if I say you, for example, if you wanted to fetch the contact list from the Apex class and then you wanted to show the contact list over here in the component, your approach will be fetching the data from the Apex class from using the JavaScript, and then you have to set the value inside an attribute here in the component, because if you don't use any component, you will not be able to display the list over here in the component. So you have to create an attribute either of list type or either of contact list. And next is find. So find is basically used whenever you are to finding a component or to finding an attribute. For example, I'm taking an input and giving an OR-ID. OR-ID is something that we can provide the ID for the attribute for an HTML attribute or ID for an Apex VA page tag. So this is the same that OR-ID test input, and here in the value I'm just putting that v.age, and on the click of, let's say that I'm not binding it with any variable. Now if I'm on the click of this button, I want the value of this particular input, because I haven't binded the input with any attribute. I am not able to use component.get using the attribute name. So for this, what we need to do, we can provide the OR-ID, and using the find method we can find the component, and then here we can just provide the OR-ID. We don't need to provide v.c. or anything. And now we have this component, and from this component we can get the value using the attribute with the help of value provider v dot value. So let's go ahead and see. Let's say I'm saying as 23. Clicking on here, it says there's invalid key test input. Let's go ahead in the JavaScript code and see where it gone wrong. So as we are getting, we must need to provide the expression like v dot value provider dot variable name, as this is the or ID. We need to use find instead of get. Now if you go back, refresh, you can see that 23. We are able to get the value whatever we have entered here in the input field. We are able to get that value over here in the component. Now if you wanted to use this value to send to the Apex controller, or if you wanted to manipulate the value, anything we can do here because we have value. And now again, if you wanted, what if we wanted to set the value for this particular input field based on some based on our calculation? So how we can use? Using the same way, we can just use component.set, and here instead of component.set we need to use this component, on which component value we wanted to set. See here, there is a difference. For setting the value of an attribute we use component, and for the setting the value of an input field using the aura ID, we always first we get the component using the component.find with the help of aura ID, and then with that component, whatever the variable name we have provided here, we can use set method the same way, providing the key and value. So here we need to say that to tell the Lightning component framework or Aura framework that hey, this is my component, and for which attribute, for the value you need to provide the 67. So if you now refresh the page, enter 23 or anything else, here you can see that it's has been changed to 67. As from the backend, from the JavaScript, we are setting it as a 67. So let's comment out the alert methods, we don't need. So this is the basic example of the component class methods. You can go ahead and explore more methods that are available here in Aura docs. And on the next slide, we already covered how we can get the attribute value in JavaScript, how we can set the value using the JavaScript set method with the help of component class, how we can get the value of input using the Aura ID, and the same for setting the value of the input that we have fetched using the Java Aura ID. So now for the lab exercise, for the practice purpose, what we will do, we will create a simple calculator utility using JavaScript. What we will do, we will provide two numbers, number 1 and number 2, and then we will provide 4 buttons, one for addition, subtraction, multiplication and division of those two numbers that user will enter. So before we go ahead, let's create a sample mock for this. Let's say that there will be two input 1, input 2, and then there will be 4 buttons. So one for addition, one for subtraction, one for multiplication, one for division. So how we will do, either we can use Aura ID for these two, or we can simply go ahead and create two number type of attributes and use those attributes in the JavaScript for getting the value for those attributes, and then based on the methods we can create or we can show the output. So what we will do, we will create two attributes, one number 1 and number 2, and then we'll bind those variables inside this lightning input type of number, and then we'll use those values inside this method. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and create a new lightning component, say that calculator. First what we'll do, we will create two attributes. Input 1, we will provide the type as integer, and then we will don't give any default value, we will say that required is true. And we will see the provide the description for first input, and the same thing we will do for the number 2. We change the name as 2 and see that second input. So now we are done with the attribute, we are done with the variable part that we need. Now the next thing is that create the lightning input of type number, because for performing the calculation we need the number value, and then for the value bind with the input 1, v dot input 1, and then for the label say that please enter your number, or you can say that please enter first value. You can also provide required as true here as well. As we are binding these inputs with the variable, we don't need to provide any OR ID for these inputs. I will say save it. It should save. So now if we'll preview this with the help of our application, we will be able to use we will be able to see the output. It is saying that this page has error, you must need to refresh.